Imagine preparing for a journey where failure isn't an option. A mission to the moon with everything on the line and the entire world watching. The Apollo 11 mission wasn't just about planting a flag, it was about pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. But the question is, did it really happen? Even over 50 years later, some people still question if we actually landed on the moon. There are theories claiming that the whole Apollo 11 mission was faked, filmed on Earth to fool the world. How do we explain the flag fluttering when there's no air? What secrets did they keep hidden? And how close were they to disaster? The story of Apollo 11 is one of risk, innovation, and triumph. And it will leave you questioning how we ever made it. Let's dive into the untold story of mankind's greatest achievement.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Welcome to It's Real. On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 mission made history with its successful moon landing.
We copy you down, Eagle.
You might be surprised to know that the reason behind Apollo 11's mission was tied to a major conflict, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were racing for dominance. In 1957, the Soviets shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. America was caught off guard. Then, in 1961, the Soviet Union made another huge leap, sending the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. America had to respond, and fast. In fact, just a week later, President John F. Kennedy asked his vice president, "How can we beat the Soviets in space?" Kennedy realized that sending a man to the moon could put America ahead. On May 25, 1961, Kennedy made the famous pledge that the U.S. would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him safely.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
This was 1961. No smartphones, no internet, and computers were extremely slow. Yet, Kennedy was committing to sending humans to the moon. To make it happen, he allocated $7 to $9 billion to NASA for the mission. The space agency was all in, with its eyes set on that goal. The testing phase kicked off shortly after. Rockets designed to send astronauts into space were put to the test. They also tested the heat shields to see how much heat they could take. The propulsion systems for the service modules were also tested. Between 1963 and 1967, there were several unmanned flights. Then, in February 1967, they attempted their first manned test, Apollo 1. Tragically, on January 27, 1967, a fire broke out inside the command module, killing the 3 astronauts aboard. But NASA didn't quit. They continued with testing. Apollo 4, 5, and 6 were unmanned. Then, in October 1968, Apollo 7 went to space with humans on board. In December 1968, Apollo 8 went around the moon. And in March 1969, Apollo 9 tested the lunar module. Finally, in May 1969, Apollo 10 orbited the moon, rehearsing every step of the landing, except the landing itself. By July 1969, Apollo 11 was ready for the big mission. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff, we have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The astronauts were Neil Armstrong, the commander, Michael Collins, the command module pilot, and Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot. These 3 names are forever linked to history. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are household names, but Michael Collins is often forgotten, and I'll explain why later. The Apollo 11 spacecraft had 3 parts: the command module, the service module, and the lunar module. The first two made up what was called the CSM, Command and Service Module. The plan was to detach the lunar module, land on the moon, then reattach and head back to Earth. The Saturn V rocket was used for the launch, weighing in at 3 million kilograms and carrying 1 million gallons of fuel. The rocket reached Earth's orbit in under 10 minutes. The spacecraft orbited Earth 1.5 times before getting the go-ahead to head to the moon. The trip took about 5 hours. By the time they reached the moon's orbit on July 19th, they were nearly 400,000 kilometers from Earth. The lunar module separated from the command module. Collins stayed in orbit aboard the Columbia, while Armstrong and Aldrin piloted the Eagle lunar module, heading for the surface. But Michael Collins was key. He stayed behind, ensuring the mission could return. This is likely why Collins doesn't get as much fame, but his role was just as important. At 8 p.m., the lunar module began its descent, but at 8:10 p.m., alarms went off. The 12:01 and 12:02 alarms. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin knew what these alarms meant. Mission Control told them to keep going. The alarms were a warning that the guidance system was overloaded, but NASA had designed the computer to keep running the most important functions. The automatic landing system was working fine. But at 150 meters, Armstrong took manual control. He saw they were about to land on large boulders, so he steered the lunar module to a safer spot. At 8:16 p.m., Aldrin noticed the fuel was running dangerously low, just 5% left. Mission Control started a countdown to abort the landing if necessary, but Armstrong managed to land the lunar module just in time, with only 30 seconds of fuel left. This moment was broadcast to 650 million people worldwide. After landing, Neil Armstrong tried to open the door to exit the lunar module and step onto the moon. It wasn't easy. Due to the pressure difference, the door was a bit stuck. But Neil managed to force it open. Then, in his bulky spacesuit, he attempted to climb down onto the moon. The exit was tight, and while trying to squeeze out, he accidentally broke off a part of the lunar module. Neither he nor Buzz noticed because, in space, there's no sound. This broken part was actually really important. It was the ascent engine arming switch. Without this switch, the lunar module couldn't lift off again, which would have meant they couldn't return to Earth. But Neil and Buzz didn't know this at the time. Neil Armstrong stepped out and became the first human to walk on the moon. Buzz Aldrin followed right after, and together they spent 2.5 hours exploring the moon's surface, collecting samples, setting up experiments, and taking photos. Despite the political tension of the Cold War, the moon landing had major scientific goals. They set up cameras to broadcast from the moon, used equipment to measure solar winds, and even shot lasers to measure the distance between Earth and the moon. They also left behind scientific instruments, like a seismometer to detect moonquakes. They gathered 23 kilograms of moon rocks, planted the American flag, and left a plaque that read, "Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. The lunar module was supposed to stay on the moon for 21 hours before returning. However, Armstrong and Aldrin didn't realize that the ascent engine switch had broken off earlier. When they tried to re-enter the module, they discovered the issue. Thankfully, Aldrin had an idea. He used a ballpoint pen to complete the circuit and start the engine. The lunar module successfully reattached to the command module, and the 3 astronauts began their return journey. The command module safely entered Earth's atmosphere, landed in the ocean, and the astronauts were rescued. The astronauts were quarantined for 2 weeks, just in case they brought back anything from the moon. The moon landing became a worldwide sensation, fulfilling Kennedy's promise. However, there are still conspiracy theories about the landing being faked. The truth is, these conspiracy theories have been proven wrong many times. If the moon landing was fake and just a trick by the US, the Soviet Union would have never accepted it. But in the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, published between 1970 and 1979, the moon landing was mentioned as a real event multiple times. In fact, Soviet writers called the Apollo landing the third biggest event in space history. The first was Sputnik's launch in 1957. The second was Yuri Gagarin's spaceflight in 1961, and the third was the moon landing. So, if even the Soviet Union accepted it, then why do some people still doubt it? One of the biggest arguments is about the flag. When the astronauts planted it on the moon, why did it look like it was waving when there is no air there? The answer is simple. The flag used on the moon was specially designed. Unlike normal flags, which hang from a single pole, this one had an extra horizontal rod at the top to keep it stretched out. NASA scientists knew that without air, the flag would just hang down, so they added this rod to make sure it stayed visible. But during the Apollo 11 mission, they couldn't extend the rod fully. That's why the flag looked wrinkled, making it seem like it was moving. Another common question is why there were no stars in the photos taken on the moon. The reason is simple. The landing happened during the daytime, when the sun was shining directly on the moon. The astronauts' white spacesuits were also very reflective. The cameras used back then weren't advanced enough to capture the faint light of stars against the bright reflections. Even today, if you take a picture at night with a bright flash, you won't see the stars clearly. Another question is about the famous photo of Buzz Aldrin taken by Neil Armstrong. In Aldrin's visor, you can see Armstrong's reflection, but there's no camera in his hand. How is that possible? The answer is simple. Armstrong wasn't holding the camera. It was attached to his suit, and he controlled it from there. And what about the photos of Armstrong himself stepping down from the lunar module? Who took those pictures? The answer is that multiple cameras were already installed on the lunar module to capture the moment. We've uncovered the truth behind these theories. But what do you think? Did any of these surprise you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And click here to watch this amazing video.